Welcome to today's lecture. My name is Chris Matthews and I'll be taking your next 3 lectures. So today's lecture is about designing user studies. We're going to look at best practices for user studies, as these are incredibly useful both for research purposes but also for evaluation purposes. They're also a potential minefield, with issues ranging from badly planned questions right through to ethical dilemmas. So it's incredibly important to take care during your designing user studies. The objective of this session is to help you understand what's involved in designing user studies and what the best practices are when you're doing so. Therefore, we'll be looking at the following topics, as you can see in the outline on the slide to your right. And as always, we have some online resources. Please do take the time to read these. These are imperative for your coursework and for your in-class tasks. So, going on to how to evaluate and design a user study. How do we go about finding out what a user really feels about an interface that we've designed? Remember that all users are human. Most of them are going to try to avoid confrontation, controversy, arguments. They want to tell you the thing that you want to hear. They don't want to tell you what you need to hear. So, when planning what to ask a user, consider the ways to negate this. For example, ask them to compare your interface to a product that they're familiar with. Is, for example, our dashboard comparable to Facebook's? Is it better? Is it worse? Why? What aspects of it actually change? What aspects do they prefer? That sort of negates the ability for them to go, oh, I don't like it, because they won't. Consider A/B testing methods. It's a similar concept, except this time you give them 2 interfaces to choose between, or 2 options in an interface to choose between. People are usually more open about pointing out the better of 2 options and simply criticizing a single one. Something that we're going to touch on further in a future lecture is the correct way to make use of statistics or metrics. Consider, for example, a dull blue register button on a website which 5% of users click on. Now consider it was changed to a bright green button with the same text. Chances are the click rate may change. It's our duty to determine not only whether a change has occurred in the click rate, but also whether that change was as a direct response to changing the colour. So, there are 2 main variables you have to consider when you're designing a user study. There are independent variables and there are dependent variables. Independent variables are things that are set by the designer. They won't change when a user interacts with the interface. For example, if you think about going through Ticketmaster and you decide to book 2 tickets for a concert and you click Buy Now, it will give you a page that say, you must buy these within 30 minutes, otherwise you'll lose your tickets. You can't change that 30 minutes. That's set. That is an independent variable. A dependent variable are things that are more controlled by user interaction, so things that change based on what the user does. There are 2 ways of designing studies around this. Within subject measure, where we expect similar behaviour from everybody. Therefore, we can get into the sort of nitty-gritty details of why a user behaves in a certain way, because most users are going to do the same thing. The other way is between subject measure, and that is when we expect different actions from different users. So, designing a questionnaire. As mentioned previously, questions from users should be planned and designed with care. Compare it to interrogating a witness in court. Now, I realise none of us are going to have much legal training, but the basic idea is the same. You need detailed, accurate answers to specific, non-leading questions. Determine the exact data that you need to get from users and focus on that. Don't get sidetracked. Don't ask for irrelevant things. If you plan to summarise the results, chances are you're not going to need personal information like names, addresses or phone numbers. Finally, remember that sometimes the physical response of someone to a question is far more meaningful than anything they can say or write. Consider whether a questionnaire is the best option for you. Maybe an interview face-to-face would be better. Or maybe consider recording a questionnaire so that you can watch it back and determine whether what someone has written is actually what they were thinking at the time. Sometimes we're going to have experimental things in user studies, maybe testing a prototype, an experimental version of a product, or an isolated part of our product. There are many factors to consider if this is the case, which I won't go through. However, there are a few important ones to touch on. If it is determined that any training is required, ensure this training does not turn the user into a subject matter expert. This is unlikely to reflect the ability of your end user. If the user is testing a pretty standard interface, such as an application or a website, the fact that training is required may tell you all you need to know already. So moving on to the ethical side of things, if you plan to do any research which involves human participants, please note that any company or organisation, such as our university, if you're a student here, has an ethical advisory committee, and it is imperative to get permission and guidelines from these people to avoid moral and ethical dilemmas. These include data protection, privacy concerns, and everything like that. Now, testing is an essential part of design and development, so why not in our research? A poorly designed user study will yield poor results. These results will continue throughout your entire design process, hindering your project. Get it right from the beginning. Try employing a small number of users to test your study on. This is called a pilot study. If it goes badly, review your questionnaires, review your practices, and see where it can be improved. User research is, at the end of the day, a scientific undertaking. You're recording facts, so ensure that accuracy is always preserved. Take your time and keep everything recorded. Remember that any research you undertake should be easily repeatable by another member of your team or maybe someone further down the line. And when presenting these results, do so in such a way that anybody can make sense of them. Don't make them personalised to yourself so that you understand what they are but no one else does. Make sure they're generally acceptable for people to read. Remember that all research, even that which seems pointless, can end up being useful in a future endeavour. So further touching on analysing data, it is important to present your results in an easily interpreted way. The use of graphs, charts, tables, all these things can make data much easier to understand. However, ensure that you use appropriate charts for each set of data. For example, a pie chart may be a good way to represent an undetailed overview of percentages within a category, but it's not ideal when you're trying to show subtle differences. For this, maybe a bar chart with columns would be far more interesting, far easier to determine differences. Stats are really, really useful, but ensure you don't become a spin doctor. At the end of the day, misleading statistics only fool yourself and increase the likelihood that your interface, your design, is only for you. It's not designing for the end user, and therefore it's destined to fail. As noted before, we will spend more time in a future lecture with Mike Hurst on statistics and some of the methods we can use. So let me leave you with your in-class task, a slight overview, and I will see you next week.